It's really weird to think about it, but it's been more than 10 years since I first launched Mass Effect and heard the amazing theme play while seeing the familiar BioWare launcher, which also means that it's been even longer since I first played Baldur's Gate, and god, does it mean that I'm old? You know, thinking back, I didn't really expect Mass Effect to blow me away, but it did, and given how flawed it is, it was often hard to tell exactly why. So I decided to replay it yet again, and then went all the way and replayed the entire trilogy. So please join me on this nostalgic journey as the story of my 3 Shepards begins. Oh, and just in case there will be spoilers. Anyway, I should go on. Returning back to the first game after experiencing the sequels feels strange. The gritty feel, the heavy grain filter, the minimalist look, the 80s synth soundtrack, and a lot of attention to the world-building detail. This is a game about the mysteries of the universe, about discovery, about the space future of humanity as much, if not more than it's a cinematic action adventure about a space cop and their funky crew. Opening the galaxy map and hearing the fantastic tune play is still a treat. So many possibilities, so many tiny stories to experience. And so you get to spend a lot of time landing on various exoplanets and moons in your hard-to-use yet versatile mecha vehicle, exploring simplistic yet atmospheric, no pun intended, atmospheric landscapes, occasionally stumbling upon interesting little stories, some of which lead to more stories, and some of which are even expanded upon in the sequels. And let's be honest, it's not particularly fun to do, since the planets are a chore to navigate, and every little thing you find leads either to the exact same minigame you have to do throughout the entire game, or to a copy-pasted location with a fight or a talk or both. But there's something engaging about it, something mysterious, like this ancient orb artifact you can find that expands on the lore of the game universe and is unnecessary to finish the game. It's just there for you to find if you explore. Or there's a little story you can stumble upon in space where a grieving biotic goes insane after losing the loved one and refusing to accept their death, and these are the kinds of things that stay with you long after the game is done. But these aren't happening as often as you'd wish them to, and most things tend to lead to fights. Fights that are almost constantly accompanied by this.
Target. Go, go, go! Hold the line! Hold the line!
And
Enemy is everywhere!
they're not fun to go through. None of the skills or weapons are particularly interesting in this game. Action is usually tedious and somewhat awkward with the bullet sponge enemies and rarely any strategy involved in fights. You just hope that enemies run out of health faster than your team while using the skills that might help you in the fights. Most character classes don't even feel particularly unique here and play more or less the same. Also, despite this amazing world-building attempt, BioWare seemingly had no time to properly develop most of the locations the way you'd expect them to be. Only the Citadel feels like a real and exciting place to visit.
Please do not disturb the keepers. Please do not disturb the keepers. Please do not disturb the keepers.
Most of the other important locations you have to visit during the main story are tiny and consist of no more than just a few small rooms and similar looking corridors to slowly run around, or long and narrow corridors to drive in your Mako. But even visiting the Citadel can be a bit of a chore due to the infamous elevator rides, which were added to hide the loading zones, and the painfully slow movement speed of your team compared to the size of the locations in the Citadel you need to move around in. Some of the side quests are boring due to this, despite the quick travel system in place, as it doesn't fix the issue completely. At least most of those side quests and main story missions are really fun and full of interesting characters. It's a bit strange just how little, at least compared to later games, a lot of your companions and Normandy crew has to say throughout the game if you talk to them.
Shepard.
Rex.
But even here, talking to these characters is a joy. Even here you can see the hints of the character development you will see in later titles, and even here most of the characters and the ways you can interact with them explore all the main themes and ideas Mass Effect wanted to talk about.
I should let you go.
Let me go. Do humans consider conversation a form of imprisonment? That would explain why so few are willing to sit and talk.
I'd say that Mass Effect 1 has most nuances in shaping your Shepard, hence why I created 3 characters back in the day. 2 of my characters love their crew and just behave differently, with one being more selfless and trying to help everyone, and the other being more impatient and ready to make a hard decision and just live with it. But my 3rd character, which was created out of curiosity, was there to explore the themes of xenophobia and human superiority, which surprisingly is also explored in the game in full, with a lot of possibilities to treat human and alien allies non-equally, and even supporting an extremist political party ideas, something that will be almost completely ignored in the sequels. What were also to be ignored in the sequels, and rightfully so, is the absolute mass of the inventory, skill and equipment systems this game had. As if the action wasn't boring enough, you had to sort through countless duplicate loot for multiple equipment slots, deal with weapon and armor proficiencies for every character, and never forget that some of the skills were vital for normal play, like the ability to hack, that was tied to a specific class skill and not available to just everyone. Yet, you could see that all of the issues that pop up constantly during your play were a result of a huge undertaking of a grand plan for the game that tried to be so many things at once for the first time in history. And while finishing the original game, going through one of the most memorable action segments in the series, and making some of the last choices, it felt as if the future of the galaxy will be starkly different for the players in the next game. A feeling that was further enhanced by the Bring Down the Sky DLC, which not just showed how the side quest design would evolve in future games, but also include an important, if binary, choice that could shape the future of the galaxy in different ways. And so the wait for the sequel has begun.
As though it was crying specifically for me.
That is a joke.
Right.
Shepard did everything right. More than we could have hoped for.
Then see to it that we don't lose him.
Yeah, BioWare weren't particularly subtle about the desire to introduce a lot of changes to the series, so they just outright murdered Shepard and then gave them the new starts right there during the opening moments of Mass Effect 2. And that opening feels perfect for the game that follows. What starts with a bang continues into an action-filled, colorful, purely character-driven adventure. And your Shepard has a personal stake in it, because the big bad villain aliens are not just attacking human colonies, but they dare to destroy your ship, kill a lot of your crew, killed you, which can only mean that ass-kicking is a-coming.
It'll be better than the old days.
I hope so. I died.
Yeah, you were such a downer.
Though that also means that little to no time is left for a lot of other elements original Mass Effect was about. Exploration is practically gone. While there are quite story-driven missions, that's what they all are, missions. Linear, short, nicely crafted and paced stories with a mission summary in the end. Not a galaxy to get lost in exploring.
Really?
There's a vehicle to drive in, but unlike Mecha from the original, these are just challenge courses, mostly linear as well. Ridiculously frustrating too, due to how often this new hammerhead thing can explode randomly and you cannot save manually during these vehicle missions. But that's not the only thing to be almost completely gone. A lot of world nuance, a lot of politics, a lot of ideas and themes that played a huge part in the first game take a backseat, with this game being almost completely about personal and character-driven stories. Lots of big decisions made in the first game feel almost unimportant here, as if BioWare gave up on the grand idea of letting players to change the galaxy in a meaningful way. You might expect vastly different talks with console with long-lasting consequences, but instead you may discuss an otherwise forgettable event with your crew. And that's when the game is at its best. What has been lost in big picture is found in all of the memorable moments you get to experience with your Normandy crew and on the missions. Companions blossom into proper personalities with their own troubles, lives, and interesting stories.
I am the very model of a scientist Solarian.
Every mission is a proper story, no matter how short it is, and absolutely everything in the game is done with a lot of style and attention to detail. The game looked great 8 years ago and looks even better in 4K, and I cannot overstate enough just how absolutely gorgeous it looks. It feels like all the effort that was spread across so many ideas in the first game was instead concentrated on making every single scene in the sequel look perfect and play good. Instead of a mess of a combat system we had in the first game, Mass Effect 2 rethinks everything to make encounters fun. Skill system is simplified to the point where every skill is useful and easy to use in combat. Inventory is gone with a loadout system in place of it, enemies are much less bullet spongy and require different approaches and strategies to defeat, and each character class plays differently because of all that. The only questionable decision here is the change of the lore-friendly hit-dissipating weapons into something similar to just having ammo, seemingly in an attempt to make encounters more dynamic, but in the process making some classes' main weapons run out of ammo, which is more annoying than anything.
How may I help you, Commander?
I'll see you later, Doctor.
Commander?
But otherwise, Mass Effect 2 feels like an incredibly smart decision to give focus to the series that started trying to be too many things at once and not being as good as it could be at any of them. Now though, it was an amazingly fun, stylish, colorful, action-packed adventure about Commander Shepard and their 12, at least if you have all the DLCs, squad mates who are super fun to hang out with. Oh, and save the galaxy again while trying not to die in the process. Lair of the Shadow Broker DLC even tries to expand on this idea in ways that are not experimented with in the main game. The story is much more bombastic, you get a player-controlled car chase, and it feels like the logical direction the series wanted to take at that point. Yet, some of the other story DLCs, including the final and particularly tedious DLC Arrival, show that the developers weren't exactly sure at that point about how to bring this whole trilogy to a satisfying conclusion. A conclusion that arrived 2 years later and left a lot of people not very satisfied. After the vast expanse of Mass Effect and slick stylish adventure of Mass Effect 2, it was hard to know what to expect from the last entry in the series Trilogy. Turned out Mass Effect 3 could be effectively summarized by one word: confusion. Interestingly, most of the problems become obvious right in the opening of the game. Opening that looks butt ugly and somehow much more dated than the second game. And wait, are you seeing this? Or more like not seeing this? The subtitles, the dialogue choices. So, turns out that those are locked at 720p and can only be scaled to higher resolutions with a mod. I could play the rest of the games as is just fine, but this game becomes unplayable without modding. Great first impressions, huh?
Hello again.
Right from that start, it also feels like the game really wants to be an epic military shooter. It constantly goes for some heroic soldier life moments and bizarrely forced turret sections, and then it remembers that the series were previously about character-driven adventure of a space cop and their crew and tries to keep that in as well, and these two directions just don't really mix well.
Can you still operate as the broker without the ship?
This mix could probably work even with the same basic plot, but with a different setup. If the Reapers were almost here instead of already harvesting worlds, with the threat being visible and real enough for the galaxy to unite and Shepard to help with that, but not so urgent that absolutely nothing but the most important story missions fit the base of the story, maybe it could work. But even the main story missions fit really badly at times. The game feels rushed, both story and quality-wise. Locations and scenes that need more time to develop are just blazed through. Characters new to the games are shoved in without really good introduction until hours in, and some of the old characters are twisted into something barely recognizable. A lot of the choices and decisions are boiled down to boring numbers, and a lot of moments that were designed to evoke empathy from the player feel forced and cheesy instead of impactful, unless they feature Shepard's companions that were introduced and explored in previous games. And that goddamn child, oh...
Everyone's dying.
While I could understand why a child, and it's symbolizing that you can't save everyone, even if that point was already made in Virmire years ago, what I'd like to think is that Shepard was just confused at this weird creature they encountered, as this is the only child you ever see in the entire trilogy. Hell, this passes for the teenager in the world of Mass Effect. Honestly though, those child nightmares show a deeper change in Mass Effect 3. While the second game shifted focus to more personal stories of people around Shepard, third game makes things even more personal about Shepard. Except this time without giving the players much choice in how the Shepard would behave. It's always tricky to have an interactive story with player input influencing the character personalities, and the first two games of the trilogy were pretty open in how your Shepard behaves, locking down just a few core elements of their personality. With Mass Effect 3 though, BioWare's vision of what Shepard says, thinks and does often overrules your choice in the matter. Which does allow for some positive change. A lot of the dialogue feels more natural. Shepard replies to a lot of things without the need for player input, and it even made possible to create a special game option where the choices are made for you so you don't have to roleplay in the game at all. Neat idea, except it led to the fact that as a result of it, or at least how it was implemented, most of the dialogue in this game is extremely simplistic. And when it comes to choices, it's usually selecting between just two ways of saying the exact same thing. Which is often tied to the morality system that by this point is also completely redundant with the concept of reputation superseding it, and honestly for the better. Interrupts introduced in the second game are now just shamelessly QTE segments that you often must do unless you want to see a game over screen. But a lot of real choices that you make in the game don't really shape how Shepard behaves when the player have no control over them. The third xenophobic Shepard I've created in the first game supported human-first policies, murdered the Council, treated alien crew members like crap, ensured the death of all but human squadmates in the second game, and gladly supported Cerberus. Oh, and went for the genocide of several alien species. Yet they react to all events in the game in the exact same way as my two other Shepards, who did things very differently. And in the Citadel DLC even get this piece of monologue as every other character does.
You were the first human Spectre, Commander. This is a great accomplishment for you and your entire species.
Except somewhere along the way you forgot about your entire species. You've saved more alien lives than you have human.
I fully understand why BioWare might not want to write possibilities for such an sociopathic asshat character, but issue is, they previously did, and it works shockingly well with the main themes of the series. But in this game, all the Shepards you can play as are more or less the same Shepard.
What is the nature of the target?
She looks like me.
Then I have found the target.
No, Glyph, it's another me. Now get going.
But speaking of the otherwise fantastic Citadel DLC, it's a beautiful goodbye feel-good piece of content that often goes completely over the top and silly, but is so entertaining it's easy to forgive all the dump. This DLC pokes fun at the trilogy itself, while giving your Shepard a chance to hang out with the friends for the last time, and shenanigans ensue obviously. It's pretty much what people probably wanted Mass Effect 3 to be about in terms of pacing and tone, a proper continuation of the previous game, but it doesn't fit the game it was added to in any way and feels more like Mass Effect 3 that never happened.
So, anyone want to talk about their people's history?
No.
So I'm the only one who misses when we used to chat in the elevators back on the Citadel.
Yes.
So disappointed.
Yet I kept on playing and enjoying Mass Effect 3 for almost 70 hours straight to play it with all my 3 characters, because mechanically it is the most refined game in the series. Sure, exploration is more or less gone by now, and a lot of things are streamlined and simplified, which is often for the better. But the action is so fun, I couldn't believe just how much fun I was having with all my characters. It might be due to the otherwise unnecessary inclusion of the multiplayer mode, but BioWare finally made the core shooter mechanics genuinely uniquely fun for each character class. And levels usually try to be something of a mix between the arena-based corridors of the second game and more open-ended design of the first, which also works to the benefit of each character playstyle. Even the ammo concept has been rebalanced so much that it's never a problem, to the point where it's hard to ignore the fact that the decision to introduce thermal clips in the first place was completely unnecessary to make action fun. But sadly, everyone's playthrough hours of enjoyment are always funneled into the last sections of the game, which feel rushed, unfinished, and barely make sense. Even with the extended cut DLC that actually introduces a lot more stupidity to the plot, the ending barely makes any sense and constantly contradicts itself.
Listen to yourself. You're indoctrinated.
And on that note of confusion, of bad writing, bad pacing, bad level design, bad visual design, and some of the worst voice acting I've ever heard in a big budget video game, this entire trilogy ends. I don't want to end on a downer. I want to stress that this whole revisit of the trilogy was extremely enjoyable. There are moments of annoyance even in the first 2 games, and there are lots of amazing things to experience even in the third one. Most surprisingly, despite replaying the games before and fully expecting to get bored at some point, I didn't. I wanted to go back to the games and continue playing, and I wanted to play Mass Effect 3 even more after finishing it 3 times.
Rain check?
Yeah.
Mass Effect Trilogy has inspired countless game developers and just people around the world to create cool stuff, to push boundaries of storytelling, or just make really funny, silly things.
I'm Agent Norman Jaden from the FBI.
You may not like being on the receiving end, but the facts are with me. You and every other human may as well be dead.
With all due respect, sir, I'm the wrong guy.
What the hell are those? Spectres operate above the law.
And while we may never see a proper remaster of the series due to how different each game was and how ambitious the original was, Mass Effect Trilogy is still worth replaying today. It's a flawed but memorable journey I was glad to make once again and will undoubtedly return to again in the future.
I suppose it's back to the fight. At least we threw one hell of a party. Probably the last one.
You may be right. But whatever happens, I know you'll see this through. And I'll be right there with you. We've been through a lot, haven't we? But it's been a good ride.
The best.